For 30 years, Amy Mickelson was the rock. She stood beside Phil through the highest highs, the Masters victories, the roaring crowds. She stood beside him through the lowest lows, the cancer diagnosis, the grueling treatments, the comeback. If there was ever a stable couple in golf, it was them. That's why this story hits different. Because now, after all of that, the rumors aren't about a bad tournament. They're about a divorce. Almost 3 decades of marriage, gone. And in the middle of the chaos, one source described it with a line that sends chills through every golf fan who hears it. He's not the same man. Think about that statement for a second. It's not about lost swings. It's not about bad putting. This is about a fundamental change. A shift so deep that the woman who held his hand through breast cancer doesn't recognize the guy sleeping next to her anymore. So what exactly happened? When did the smiling Phil we grew up watching start to fade? And what pushed Amy to finally walk away? We're going to break down the timeline, the private moments, and the real reason behind that haunting quote. But I want to be clear, this isn't a gossip story. This is about how the pressures of fame, money, and competition can hollow out a man until he's a ghost of himself. Here's my point of view. I think we've been ignoring the warning signs for years. The public Phil and the private Phil became 2 entirely different people. Do you agree, or do you think this is just the media blowing things up? Drop your take in the comments. And if you want the full truth, the actual moments that shattered this marriage, hit that subscribe button. Because the headlines are just the tip of the iceberg. The deep dive is coming right up. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of Phil's career. You know that story. The beginning of Phil and Amy as a team. They married in 1996, when Phil was already a rising star, but nowhere near the legend he would become. She wasn't just a wife in the background. She was his anchor. When he lost majors, she was there to pick him up. When he won, she was the first face he searched for in the crowd. And then came 2009. That was the year everything changed. Or so we thought. Amy was diagnosed with breast cancer. Phil stepped away from golf to be with her. He talked about quitting the tour entirely. For a while, he was her full-time caregiver. That image of Phil pushing through the pain, staying by her side through chemo, it cemented his reputation as the good guy, the family man, the one who got it right while Tiger was falling apart. That was the Phil we all loved. That was the Phil who could do no wrong. But here's the thing about public images. They're often built on a foundation of carefully managed moments. And while we were all applauding Phil for being the devoted husband, something was already cracking underneath. Something that would take years to fully break. You see, champions like Phil don't just flip a switch one day. They don't wake up and decide to become a different person. It's a slow erosion, a creeping rot that starts with small compromises, small justifications, small lies told to yourself and to everyone around you. And for Phil, that erosion began around 2015. That's the year insiders point to as the turning point. Not a single event, but a collection of them. A shift in behavior, more drinking, more time away from home, a restlessness that his closest friends started noticing. One former friend put it bluntly, he started drinking more. A lot more. He was never that guy before. Never the one who needed a bottle in his hand at every dinner. But then it became routine. And with the drinking came other things. Other things. That's a vague phrase, but when you start connecting the dots, it paints a disturbing picture. By 2015, Phil was no longer just the lovable gambler who took risky shots on the course. He was taking risks off the course too. Risks that would eventually cost him everything. The first crack wasn't public, but it was deep enough to split his world in two. And what happened next would prove that crack was only the beginning. Let's rewind to the 2015 Barclays tournament. That week in New York, Phil invited fellow pro Pat Perez and his wife Ashley to stay at his villa. It seemed like a friendly gesture, a top player sharing his space with a colleague. But what happened behind closed doors would become one of the most disturbing allegations in golf history. According to Ashley Perez, it was a normal evening at first. Wine on the terrace, casual conversation. Then Pat went to the bathroom, and in those few minutes alone, Phil pulled out his phone. He showed Ashley a photo, a nude photo of himself, fully exposed, flexing his bicep. Then he made an offer so brazen it's almost unbelievable. "Tonight I'll leave the bedroom door open. When Pat falls asleep, I want you to come find me." Let that sink in. This wasn't a drunken mistake in a bar. This was a calculated move, made in the home of a man who was supposedly a friend. Ashley rejected him immediately. She told Pat the next day, and Phil spent months apologizing, trying to make it right. But here's the part that hits hardest. That incident didn't stop Phil's slide. It actually accelerated it. Because once you cross a line like that, once you betray a friendship in such a degrading way, the guilt either forces you to change or pushes you deeper into denial. Phil chose denial. He kept telling himself it was a one-time thing, a bad night, too much wine. But the truth is, the pattern was already there, and the pattern kept repeating. The tracking device wasn't on his golf clubs, it was on his life. And the person who knew exactly where he was going started to wonder if she ever really knew him at all. By 2021, the mask was slipping fast. Phil had been kicked out of 3 private golf clubs in California: Madison Club, the Bridges, and the Farms. Each one had its own story, but the common thread was the same: inappropriate behavior toward women, followed by sudden exits. At Madison Club, the official story was that Phil voluntarily left, but club insiders say it was Amy who forced the move. One senior manager recalled a phone call from Phil and Amy's wealth management team. "We need to sell Phil's house immediately. He's done at Madison." The implication was clear. Amy was cleaning up his mess. Again. Then came the Bridges. This was where the tracking trick emerged. Phil knew Amy was monitoring his location, so he came up with a scheme straight out of a spy movie. He'd give a kid at the club's golf shop $500 to take his phone and drive around the course for 3 or 4 hours. Meanwhile, Phil would be somewhere else entirely. Amy was watching a dot on a map that wasn't even him. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was psychological. He was actively deceiving her while she sat at home, thinking he was being faithful. And at the Farms, the allegations turned physical. A female employee reportedly filed a complaint about inappropriate contact. Phil's team later said the misunderstanding was cleared up, but the damage was done. He was no longer welcome at any of these places. By this point, Amy had to be asking herself the hardest question: is this the man I married? Is this the man who held my hand during chemo? Because the Phil she knew would never have done these things. The Phil she knew would never have paid a teenager to run a phone marathon just to avoid her eyes. She fought cancer and won, but she couldn't fight the thing that was slowly killing her husband from the inside, because she didn't even know what it was. And that's the heart of this story. The biggest mystery isn't the clubs or the naked photos. It's the why. Why did Phil, a man who had everything, wealth, fame, a devoted family, throw it all away for a series of cheap thrills? The answer, according to those who know him, is complicated. It wasn't just about sex or alcohol. It was about control. For decades, Phil was the underdog who won big. He was the people's champion, the risk-taker who always had a smile. But underneath that grin was a man who felt immense pressure. Pressure to stay relevant. Pressure to keep winning. Pressure to prove he was better than the younger guys. And when the wins started drying up, when his game began to slip, he looked for other ways to feel powerful. That's where the drinking came in. That's where the risky behavior with women came in. It was a way to prove to himself that he still had it, still could get what he wanted, still could bend the rules. But here's the tragedy. The more he chased that feeling, the more he lost the one thing that actually mattered. Amy, the woman who had been his rock, his partner, his everything, was watching this stranger take over her husband's body. She didn't just confront him once. There were conversations, fights, attempts at counseling, but Phil was too far gone. He'd convinced himself that he was the victim, that Amy was being too controlling, that the media was out to get him, that everyone was jealous of his success. And then came the LIV golf decision. That was the final straw. Not just because he left the PGA Tour, but because of how he left it. He trashed the tour that made him famous. He called them greedy, said they didn't respect players. He aligned himself with a Saudi-backed group that many saw as a sellout move. For Amy, who had always been the quiet, dignified presence behind him, this was humiliating. She didn't sign up for a political war. She signed up for a marriage. By 2026, the rumors of divorce were everywhere. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. There has been no official filing, no court documents. Amy has remained publicly silent, and her team even released a statement praising her unwavering love and extraordinary grace. She hasn't walked away, yet. But the signs are clear. The man she married is gone. The question is whether there's anything left of him worth saving. The public saw a player who switched tours. The private world saw a man who switched personalities. And the wife who knew him best had to decide which one was real. Now we have to ask the hardest question. Is Phil Mickelson a victim of his own success? Or is he a man who made a series of choices that led to this moment? Because the pressure of being a golf legend is real. The constant travel, the media scrutiny, the need to perform at the highest level, it wears people down. Many athletes have turned to substances or infidelity to cope. It's not an excuse, but it's a context. But Phil didn't just have a rough patch. He built a second life. He lied to his wife systematically. He humiliated her by association. He attached his legacy to a controversial tour that many fans despise. And through it all, he kept smiling that same smile. That's what makes this so chilling. The smile, the laugh, the charm. They were all still there on camera. But behind closed doors, Amy was living with a stranger. A man who would show his naked body to another man's wife. A man who would pay a teenager to deceive his spouse. A man who would burn bridges with clubs, friends, and ultimately, his own family. And the worst part? He doesn't seem to think he did anything wrong. In his mind, he's the victim. The media is out to get him. His wife is overreacting. The tour is corrupt. Everyone else is the problem. That's the definition of a man who has lost touch with reality. And when you combine that with the gambling addiction that's been rumored for years, the millions spent on bets, the risky financial moves, you start to see a pattern of self-destruction that goes far beyond golf. So here we are. In 2026, Phil Mickelson is a ghost of his former self. He's barely played this season. He missed all 4 majors, something that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. His kids are grown, but they've witnessed their father's unraveling. And Amy is left holding the pieces of a life that was supposed to be perfect. That phrase, "he's not the same man," it's not just a headline, it's a diagnosis, and the cure might not exist. So what's next for Phil? He could still file for divorce himself. He could try to reconcile. He could fade into retirement and try to rebuild some dignity. But the damage is done. His reputation is shot. His marriage is hanging by a thread, and the fans who once adored him now look at him with pity or disgust. But I want to leave you with this thought. For all the scandals, all the betrayals, all the terrible decisions, there's still a part of Phil that we fell in love with. The guy who gave his jacket to a fan in the cold. The guy who wept with his wife after her cancer treatment. That guy is still in there somewhere. He's just buried under years of poor choices and unchecked ego. Maybe this wake-up call is exactly what he needed. Maybe losing his wife, his legacy, and his spot in the game will force him to look in the mirror and ask the question he's been avoiding for a decade: who do I actually want to be? We don't know the answer yet, and neither does Amy. But one thing is certain, the story of Phil Mickelson is far from over. It's a tragedy, but tragedies can have redemptions. The only question is whether Phil wants redemption more than he wants to be right. Before I wrap up, I want to know what you think. Are we too harsh on Phil? Does the pressure of being a legend excuse some of this? Or is there no excuse for the way he treated Amy? Drop your honest opinion in the comments. I read every single one. And if this deep dive gave you a new perspective, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're here to give you the real stories behind the headlines. No fluff, no sugarcoating. Just the truth, as we see it. Thanks for sticking around till the end. This one hurt to write, because we all rooted for Phil. But sometimes the hardest thing to do is look at a hero and see a flawed human being. That's what we just did. And that's the most honest conversation we can have.